Good morning. Good morning. I think we should probably make a start. It's 8:31 in this part of the world. It'll be varying times in varying other parts of the world. So welcome to the third and final webinar on respect with myself and Sonja. I'm delighted to say that I'm taking pretty much a back seat today. Sonja's going to run the show, and we're delighted to welcome Helen Rhodes, who is our guest speaker today. Sonja will be introducing her more fully and talking to her and getting her perspectives on respect as a senior HR professional. So welcome. We're going to try to be good on time. These are short sessions, 30 to 45 minutes, and you'll be able to get on with your day. So Sonja, over to you.
Right, yes, thanks, Kevin. Welcome. As Kevin already
Sonja,
said,
I can't hear you.
You cannot hear me? Really?
I can hear you, Sonja.
I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay.
You too, Sonja.
Kevin, get your ears checked because you seem to be having that problem regularly.
Let me just do a check here. Forgive me for interrupting. I can't hear Sonja at all. Sonja, go on. It's okay. This is yeah, silly man in England who's just got his volume turned down to zero, having turned off the music. So great start to the day. Sonja, where you go.
Fantastic start to the webinar again. Welcome, everybody. For those of you who don't yet know me, I'm Sonja Allen. I'm the COO of HSC Partners Consultancy, and I'm really excited today to talk to Helen Rhodes about the organizational angle of institutionalizing respect. So for those who have joined our previous sessions, you will know about our little respect model. For those who haven't, we have identified that institutionalized respect is essentially in the combination of good policy and good conversation. In our first webinar, we talked in very much detail about this model. The last one focused on the person-centric angle, on the conversational angle. And today we have Helen with me to talk about the policy angle as much as to talk about how to actually then bring this policy to life. So we're going to be looking at all those different angles of policy. You know, what does it mean? What is important? What are the policies and processes that organizations can utilize to show respect? And most importantly, how do you take them and make them a living and breathing thing and not just something that sits in a drawer? So I'm not the best person to talk about this. The best person to talk about this is our guest, Helen. So Helen is currently the People Shared Services Director at the Post Office, but you name it, Helen's worked there. She's been at the Gap, she's been at Bombardier. I could list dozens of companies. So I'm really pleased to welcome her and talk us through the organizational angle on respect. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Sonja. Thanks for that, and thanks for the big intro to you and Kevin.
Of course. To all you guys in the webinar, we really want this to make this. I mean, this is a Soundwave webinar, so let's make it as conversational as we can. Please, if you do have questions, if you do have any comments that you want to share, put them in the chat. Kevin will be our chat watcher, which is an official job as of today. And he will just interrupt Helen and I in our flow and ask your questions for you. So please get involved if you want to. But Helen, let me maybe start here. So maybe can you help us to understand what part does the formation and application of good policies play inside a culture of respect?
I think the model says it really well. It actually puts a framework together for people to actually have and to live by and to work by. I think the most important thing, and you said it earlier, they don't just live in a drawer, they're living processes and things that actually, happen on a day-to-day basis, whether or not you look at a document or you're actually seeing it apply. I think it's also about continuous improvement, and it's also about ensuring that you have what you need to be adaptable to changing environments, changing issues, and moving the conversation on. So that really juxtaposition between policy and conversation is absolutely so true in every organisation today. I think the other piece that we need to think about is culture and how policies and respect, work in different cultures, because it's very different in different environments, and you've got to be tailored to that in terms of what you do. Most important thing is don't use jargon in terms of that piece. Every organisation is different, and trust me, it depends whether you're in manufacturing, in retail, or anything else. Jargon is key to every organisation. The number of TLAs or three-letter acronyms that you have in your daily life will depend on which organisations you're in. But the important thing is make your policies and processes really understandable to everyone in terms of where things are. And that shows respect in itself.
Yeah, I can really see that. I mean, it's interesting, as you mentioned, the policies not living in the drawer, and I can Helen and I know each other from a previous life, and I can think of a perfect example where we've witnessed the impact of bringing respect to life. But Helen, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about where you have witnessed the impact of policy being alive, and give us an example at where you've been successful at institutionalizing this?
Sure. Well, we all do different jobs in our careers and start off in different places, but I had the wonderful and amazing experience of being able to create a brand new service. So this was when Sonja and I were both in Bombardier, and I was given the opportunity to create an HR shared service centre to cover 17 countries with 10 different languages over Europe. So what that meant was literally going to a foreign country, bringing a number of people together, about 120 in the end, with different cultures, different ways of doing things, to serve 17 different countries. And wonderful opportunity, blank piece of paper. But where do you start? You've got a big organisation in terms of where you are already, covering such diverse countries as Germany, France, Sweden, Italy, and a number of other places. You're dealing with HR things, and everybody knows that the basis of HR policies and processes tend to be the law, and that's very different in different countries. So from that perspective, I had almost a blank piece of paper, but things to bring together very quickly. And the three most important things in bringing those people together was about process, giving them a framework and an understanding in terms of policies of how we were going to serve the customers. Systems. So we were using existing systems, so we had to teach people how to use them, but also respect what the system could and couldn't do. And finally, really those people themselves, they had to be the right people in terms of the culture to serve the customers. But we had to form together as a group very quickly in order to provide each other respect, but to use the framework of the processes that we had to do what we needed to do. And that's not easy. Because you're bringing people who have never worked in that environment before, but secondly, you're bringing different cultures together where respect means different things to different people. So actually understanding their values, understanding how we were going to take those into our processes, and actually then mirror the values of our customers in different parts of the European landscape, because it would be very different. And there's lots of examples where doing things differently engenders different respect from different people.
I mean, I remember thinking back at the time, it was not just an environment where I was part of Helen's team back then. where we felt fully respected in our work. You know, we had fantastic opportunities to develop. We had challenging assignments, but where also we were very protected in terms of, we went over to Romania from the sites, and our customer at the time didn't necessarily want to respect us. They had quite some objections against it, but we were protected from the organization, and it was ensured that we were shown respect. So it was this double-sided focus on respectful interaction, I think, for me, that made it so successful.
And I think it's that dual piece, isn't it? And we can see that in the Soundwave paper about nurturing and supporting, and at one angle, and as you said, that protection piece to ensure that the organisation protects both its customers, but also the people that work for it. So whether you're dealing with a works council in Germany, let's say, which engenders a different respect than an employee representative in the UK, which is different again in terms of where things are. And how people expect you to talk to them is absolutely key to that, but your foundation is always your process.
Yeah, yeah. So what does it take? I mean, if from your experience, to really bring policy to life, what are the steps? What do you do?
I think number one about everything else is persistence. If I had to use one word, it's absolutely persistent. You won't get it right first time. And you've got to understand that you won't get it right first time. You strive to do so. We all strive to be perfect in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and we use our experience and what we know to make that happen. But the key piece is actually trial and error. First of all, to make sure what works, to pilot in terms of that piece. It's about clarity. You know, give it to somebody who has no understanding of the subject in which the process of policy is talking about, and make sure they understand it, and make sure they can see the organisation's values within the process and policy itself. The third thing, I think, is role modelling. You know, you have to actually show that you follow processes. You know, as a senior leader, you don't bypass the nearest process. You don't, make sure you have respect for it, and you show respect to others in terms of where things are. And lastly, I think it's that cultural piece again, and ensuring the diversity, but also the understanding, and the words that you use are super important as well.
Sonja, can I just interrupt you a second?
Yeah.
So message from the message board. It's Chat Watcher here. So this is a message from somebody called Alan. I don't know who he is. How would Helen's experience in Romania contrast with having to change a brownfield organisation? So not a new facility, but an existing facility.
Always the challenging question, Alan. Thank you. I think that there's two things there. I think the experience in Romania meant that you could start from scratch, but that brought its own difficulties as well, because you were dealing with an experience, but also that steep learning curve that needed to be done quickly. When you're in a brownfield site, which I am at the moment, in terms of a very different organisation, it's about understanding the past. So having respect for the past in terms of what's been done before, and it's all about evolution and not necessarily revolution. So in Romania, it was about revolution, starting something new, starting from the start. And really in brownfield side, it tends to be evolution, and it depends on the culture and the pace of the organisation. So you've got to get to know that very quickly and understand what works, what doesn't work, but also what the organisation's objectives are. It's really key in terms of making sure, and that to do that, you find out that by conversation and by really understanding how the organisation actually works. Then you create your new policies or your change policies, or use the existing ones, but use them in a different way.
Next to my next question that I had prepared for you, Helen, I'd really like to understand, so how do we ensure, or how do policies reflect business values?
I think it's critical. I think if you take a look at, for example, the world of talent. So when the markets was crying out for new talents a few years ago, and the best graduates were absolutely demanding what they could, the first two things that most graduates looked at was the company's sustainability policy, because the green agenda is very important to certain generations, but also the diversity and inclusion policy. So how did they treat different organisations with different values, different people, and different ways of doing things? So actually your process dictated which talent actually came to you in the first place. Of course, things like remuneration also helped. So the companies that offered the biggest packages were generally those there. But actually, people are looking for different things than more than just pure recognition. And actually, that's where your processes really come in. So to be able to engender your values into your processes is absolutely key, but they've got to be real. They've got to show what the organisation is really like. They can't just be a piece of paper, as you said before, Sonja, that sticks in the drawer and actually doesn't reflect the organisation. Your business ethics is key in terms of how that's reflected. And as long as you see those processes being modelled by others, that's where the conversation comes in, and showing again the model that we have through Soundwave is that's where it really comes together at the apex of how it works well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, as you are talking, I kind of remember, I remember working for an organization who had this fantastic diversity hiring project, and they brought brilliant people in, and they left. The great talent left because it wasn't what they were sold on paper. Very quickly, great female leaders were like, this isn't what I signed up for. There were several of these instances. So yeah, I really understand that. Now, from the other perspective, tell me about respect for the customer. Is that critical as well? And how do you institutionalize that?
I think it is absolutely critical in terms of our own values of respect are very different for different people, whether depending on where you grew up in terms of your culture and what your surrounding as to where things are. But I think that the most important thing is to understand that from your customer perspective, especially if you're dealing with a customer who may live and work in a different country and have an understanding, or even in a different socio-economic area than where you grew up in. So I think it's important. What you often hear from experts is that lowest common denominator, and I hate that phrase in terms of where things are, because it's not about that, it's about personalization. And I think what we'll see certainly in the HR world is that efficiency and trying to standardize more and more going forward, but that with that element of personalization. We all see that starting to happen as technology develops. Our spam email is always "Hi Helen" now these days, because personalization is being used. But I think it's more important to have that relationship. And I think even in an area like a shared service, where you might speak to a particular customer once a month, once a year, once in a blue moon sometimes, but to institutionalize that respect from the moment that you talk to them, it is really important. So, for example, talking to somebody in Germany, you wouldn't address them by their first name straight away in certain cultures and certain organizations. And knowing that and understand that that's respectful, you might do at the end of the conversation, or they might say to you, call me Helen or call me Sonja in terms of where things are. But you wouldn't start off that way. Whereas in the UK, I don't know about yourself, but, if I pick up the phone and they say, is this Mrs. Rhodes? I kind of go, oh, I'm looking around for my mother-in-law. It tends to be the way people talk to each other and understand the culture as to where things are. And I think it's really important to understand those nuances of culture and conversation in line with your policies and processes.
So Helen, I've a question for you, if I may jump in, going back to close to when you began your very interesting input this morning. You mentioned that CI is a continuous improvement, is an important facet of policy. And I was sort of a bit surprised by that because, you know, ordinarily, I certainly tend to think of applying continuous improvement to processes. How do you apply continuous improvement to policies? And do you have an example you could share with us on that?
I think the biggest example is if we look back, and I certainly look back in my career, you know, I started working for Mercedes-Benz as a graduate trainee in HR in 1997. I'm showing my age there. But in 97, where actually no one really talked about diversity and inclusion as a policy. It was just, you know, equal opportunities. Yes, we'll give equal opportunities to all in terms of that piece. But actually, if you fast forward even 10 years after that, diversity and inclusion was at the top of every HR agenda and still is today. And I think that continuous improvement piece in terms of your policy suite to go from equal opportunities to go to something more, which is about inclusion and making the framework there for there to be inclusion, to have groups and invest time and money, and that's what it sometimes takes in organisations to have networks, a disability network, for example, or a women's network, or whatever it might be, depending on the organisation, is absolutely crucial, and that's what real talent is looking for. So in terms of being successful as a company, you can't be successful without those groups of people, and the processes must match those groups of people.
It's a very interesting example, the one you give. I mean, is this a case of the formation of policy following social trends, or to some extent leading social trends?
I think it depends what you're talking about, Kevin, to be honest. I think that one specifically, is it following social trends, or was it the right thing to do at the start of things? And I think very much when you think about policy, it is about the right thing to do. And that might be due to social pressure or social trends, but it also might be inherent in your values as a company, or dependent on what you actually do as a company, you know, because that's very different depending on, for example, if you're a manufacturer of cigarettes, you're not going to have a strong anti-smoking policy because it's not going to be that piece. But actually, if you're a charity, for example, what you're going to have is very good policies in terms of caregiving, or in terms of ensuring that people are given time off, for example, to do charitable work.
Do you think then there's somehow a gap sometimes in, you mentioned the right thing to do, and I think that really resonates with respect, but what you then mentioned about, for example, the cigarette manufacturer made me think sometimes maybe an organization chooses not to do the right thing because of their commercial position.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
It's really different for each organisation, and where you go. For example, you know, I've worked in retail, as you said before, Sonja, and it's accepted that living wage is paid in retail. Is that the right thing to do in terms of where things are? And then you get different organisations. So Gap is a great example of a company that was the first company in the US to introduce the $10 minimum wage. You know, and was that because they could afford it, or their competitors were doing it? No, it wasn't. It was because they wanted to be different, and that was part of their brand values in terms of being innovators and being new as to where things are. So you can use processes and policies to be different and have a differentiator, or to actually show what you do as an organisation and what you are as an organisation.
That's fantastic. I never looked at it at that, but that's such a light bulb moment. I have one last question. I don't know if there's questions or comments in the chat, Kevin.
No, there are no more at the moment. I've just sent out a request for questions.
Okay, I have one more question, which is, I'm a practical person, right? So I love a good instruction. Helen, what's your top tip in policy formation?
Don't keep them in the drawer, and you won't get it right first time. I think both of those are critical in terms of the organisation, because you might have the most respectful people in terms of that piece, but actually you'll get a very different service from one to another if you haven't got that policy framework. And I think if you remember that and always, strive for that continuous improvement, you'll always have an organisation and a framework that will work for you. I see one other conversation chat in terms of from Armin. So is process always top down or bottom up? And I think that's a great question, because actually it's both, and it's critical, because just using the example I gave earlier about talent, actually organisations quickly developed their sustainability and diversity and inclusion if they weren't good, because they were missing out on talent. So the reason for it to come forward was really about that bottom-up approach. But also, I'm using my experience in Romania, people would come to me and say, actually, this bit's missing. We really need something else for this, because it's not working out, because our customers have either an expectation or they want that framework in order to make it happen. So what do we need to put in place in terms of policy to make that happen?
But it's in the respect of the senior leader then to listen to the team and to make those changes and to listen to the market and to, so that's,
yeah.
Listening
is critical. The old adage is you've got two ears, one mouth. It is so true in an organisation that you're trying to develop or through trying to continuously improve, because you're not going to get there by not listening. Sometimes, of course, you've got to get the work done and either put something aside or deal with the issue at hand. But actually, if you don't listen, you don't get the best out of either your policy or your people, and certainly not by your systems. Because if your people are telling you that your systems are not working and you're not listening, you'll never get there in terms of what you need to do.
Yeah.
So, Helen, I have one other question for you, which you can probably see, which is from our friend Alan again, who neither of us know. How difficult is it to coordinate respect across an organisation? Does it need measuring or policing?
The old measurement and policeman. I think everyone's striving today to be able to measure everything, and I think from that perspective that there are different measurements of respect. We've all seen it on different values of different organisation, the word respect, but how do you measure that? We've also seen it in whatever you call your employee engagement survey. It might be a pulse survey or however you decide it. Generally, there's a conversation there, or certainly a number of questions, either quantitative or qualitative, about respect. Do you feel respected? Do you show others respect? Or whatever it might be. Does your line manager respect you? Generally are the kind of questions that you see, and from strongly agree to strongly disagree. But very much is how it feels, and that's really different for different people, because the amount of respect they want to see in an organisation will depend on a number of things, from their social background, from the way that they've been brought up, but also from their experience in work. So one might, and let's not be too generic, but if you've grown up in terms of your work experience in a financial bank, let's say, in an organisation, the word respect will mean very different things to you than if you're working in the third sector. So from that perspective, it is just very different. Now, you can measure it, and organisations do measure it very successfully. if you ask people whether they agree with that measurement or within that final piece as to where things are, you'll get very different answers.
Okay, I think I stopped sharing out of nowhere, didn't I? Okay, if we don't have any more questions, I just, so we're going to stay here for a little bit of a conversation, as we always do at the end of it. But what I do want to quickly highlight again is the paper that started all of this. So it's available on the Soundwave Global website, and it's written by Kevin, of course, and it talks about why respect is important, and it really formed the foundation of this three-part series on institutionalizing respect. Now, that's pretty much it for the formal part. Helen, thank you so much. I really had some massive light bulb moments talking to you, and also it's been a pleasure as always to see you and to chat with you.
No, thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for your questions. Alan, we will catch up at some point, I'm sure, and talk about this more.
Right. I mean, I'm happy to stay on for 10-15 minutes. I think we are as it's Helen and I running the show today for the first time actually within our allocated time. So we have another 15 minutes to answer your questions and have a chat. I'm going to stop sharing. Please turn on your videos, open your microphones, and let's have a chat.
Now, I'm in here. I'd like to make a statement here, which I feel is very important. In an organization, you cannot have double standards on values or respect. And I've seen this happening, or I've seen the attempt happening, where an attempt was made to pretend to customers a level of respect without actually exercising such respect towards the own people in-house. And this does not really work. So that consistency in an organization, I feel, is a very, very important requirement. And that is one of the points that is something that, in my experience, must come top down. It must be wanted from the top, that there is no discrepancy that is allowed to develop.
Sorry, Armin. I was going to say I totally agree. You know, as I said before, you've got to role model that in terms of where things are. And if your people don't feel that respect, then it's never going to be shown to the customer. However much they want to put it in their publicity or their advertisement in terms of that piece, it's never going to live and breathe, because you feel it. You know when you're having a conversation with someone, whether or not they're genuine. And really, that being genuine actually shows the respect that you give to others. So great point, Armin. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, this is Kim Pong, and hi, Helen. Thanks for sharing just now. Love your sharing. I have a question, which is, with regards to respect, is it something to be given, or is it something to be earned? Right. So a lot of times, people are like, you gotta earn the respect, man. But in this conversation that we're having, which is more critical, which is more important, to give it or to earn it?
To absolutely give it. In terms of where things are, it's like giving someone a present. You don't give someone a present in expectation of receiving a present back. And I think that's very true in terms of respect, or how you treat others, as to where things are. And when you have such limited interactions that you might do with a customer, as I said before, they might be your customer once. And therefore, that customer to be able to go away and say, I had respect from that organisation and from that person actually means so much, because they'll soon tell you if they didn't. And customers are more likely to tell you, 8 out of 10 times whether they've had a bad experience than they are whether they've had a good experience. And that's critical in terms of the respect. The earning respect is actually, it's cultural as well in terms of some places. So I think, yes, you don't naturally get respect, but politeness and showing that you give respect is absolutely key.
Thank you.
The more I hear you talk, the more I'm starting to form a picture in my head, which I hadn't had before we started talking today. And we talked about respect and organization a lot, which is showing respect and institutionalizing respect well makes massive commercial sense for an organization. Because if you don't, you lose the good talent. If you don't, you lose your customers. If you don't, your employees might go on strike. So it isn't just the right thing to do from a value perspective. It's the right thing to do at every level, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and let me give you a little example. So earlier in my career, I did lots of TP transfers, so moving organisations and people moving from one organisation to another through outsourcing deals and various bits and pieces. And I was dealing with a small city council where their IT department was being outsourced to us as an organisation. They'd been outsourced 8 times. So they were used to the process, far more experienced than I was at the time, in terms of where things are. And actually, the reason they were so upset was not because our terms and conditions were different, not because we hadn't shown them respect in terms of where things are, was because what was important to them was getting free drinks. And it might be a very small thing, but actually we lost complete respect as an organisation with that team of people because we took away their milk money. And it's the small things, but understanding your customer and their values and what's important to them actually shows the respect.
Yeah. Good example.
I've got a point. I'm not quite sure how to raise my hand, so I'm just going to speak and tell me to be quiet if I'm out of place. Helen, good morning officially, by the way.
Good morning.
The point you made about respect being a present to be given, that's something I hadn't considered before. That means that it works independent of hierarchy in an organization. It goes up and down, I would imagine.
It has to. It absolutely has to. No longer are we working in an environment, for example, where Japanese organizations, where the most senior executive could, basically, when they left the organization, people could start leaving the organization, so that the person in the lowest in the hierarchy would be last to leave. Yeah. We're not working in that environment anymore. It's that customs and norms and values have changed greatly. And I think if you don't show respect as a senior leader, you won't get it from different parts of the hierarchy. And actually, the role modeling piece is where senior leaders really need to be in terms of respect, because it's about respecting the opinion of that person in the lowest part of the hierarchy. So, Sonja's example was great in terms of saying, they'd come to me in Romania and say, we've got something missing. If I hadn't listened to that, I would be missing a great chunk of my customers as to where things are, and not understanding that. So it's showing that respect to people in different parts of the hierarchy, whether they're your customers, your stakeholders, or any others. The other piece, and especially in the environment I'm working in today, is with unions, for example. You've got to listen. You might not like the way they talk to you. You might not like what they say necessarily, but actually what they're reflecting is how your stakeholders feel about you. So you've got to listen and respect what they have to say. You may not agree with it, but you have to respect it.
And do you find then in that situation, which I can imagine is quite adversarial, that respect goes in both directions?
Yes and no. I think some people, you can't expect respect from everyone. So you as an individual can give respect, absolutely, but don't expect it to come back to you. I think it will in different scenarios, and eventually people will. And working in HR, it's something that you tend to get. You know, unfortunately, you do make people redundant. Unfortunately, you do have to give hard messages to some people. When they look back a number of years ago, and the joys of LinkedIn means people do get in touch with you years after a particular event, and they say, wow, I just look back on how you treated me at that time, and I feel, you know, great, and I didn't at the time, and I just wanted to say thank you because it was the best thing I did. And actually, that's the respect you get as a professional, is having that either ever returning customer or that person actually saying thank you and showing the recognition from the respect that you showed them.
This is such an example that rings so true with me. So here's one of my Helen's in my personal history. I applied for a job. I wanted to stay in Romania. And Helen didn't give me the job. And I stood in her office and I was so upset because Helen was a great mentor of mine. And I was so upset, and I think I was crying I was actually crying. It's like, why didn't I get the job? And Helen said to me, because it's not the right thing for you, for your development. And hadn't she done that at the time, hadn't she shown me this respect for my future, I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be holding this webinar. I wouldn't be part of a consultancy business. Helen really showed me respect through denying me what I wanted at the time and putting me on a path to do something that's much more suited to me.
I always wondered who was to blame.
May I ask a question? It's partly directed at Helen, but it's directed at everybody. I think sort of coming into this webinar series, we've turned up with a point of view, which is that respect, when people feel it, is a consequence of the interaction of two things. It's a consequence of, on the one hand, conversation or interaction, and on the other hand, it's a consequence of the way in which policy is applied. And we're saying the intersection of those two things gives you the optimal position. But I'm wondering how true everybody feels that is. And sorry, some background engineering work's going on here. I hope you can hear me. What's most important? Have we got it right in saying that it's a combination of policy and interaction that's important? Or is it the case that actually interaction is just so much more important than whatever policy might contribute, or vice versa? Because our position is a sort of hypothesis, is an idea to provoke conversation. So I'm wondering what people now think, having listened to 3 webinars on the subject.
My concern would be that if we have the best policies in the world, they still have to be administered in a way that demonstrates respect. And it is so easy to foul up at that point of interaction. And I know people are far more resilient than machines. They come back and you can correct it, whereas a machine gets broken. But it still relies on that interaction. And I know you can't measure it, I know you can't police it, and I know you can't video camera everything that goes on, but there needs to be something in there, in my view, which gives us an increased chance of success than pure luck.
I was going to say, actually, open conversations which factor in respect are much more likely to lead to fairer, more inclusive policy. You know, honest conversations will naturally, and you know, I love this term, the gift of respect. If you give the gift of respect at the get-go, you're more likely to achieve what it is that you need. People will be more open with you.
There's one aspect that I would like to add. Very important element is the awareness to earn the respect, particularly the higher up the hierarchy someone is. And the person at the highest level should be the most aware that that respect in his or her leadership needs to be earned in the first place, so that it works for the organization genuinely and in the long term.
I'd like to chime in on that. I like what Armin is saying in that, and especially I think in the Asian culture, right? When you go from a bottom to top equation, respect has to be given, right? It doesn't matter who you are. But when they go from the top down, very often the mentality is that you're going to earn your respect, before I give it to you, right? But one of the things that I've experienced when I was a fresh graduate from the University of Michigan, I worked for Domino's Pizza in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the CEO back then was Tom Monahan. And this was one guy where, I came from an Asian culture whereby, when you see somebody a whole lot more senior than you are, you give the respect to the guy. And if that guy, or whoever it is who are more senior than you do not acknowledge you, you just move on, right? Because that's expected to be. But what Tom Monahan did was, he literally came down to the level of every employee, from the most junior to the most senior, and he looked everybody in the eye, and he treated everybody with dignity, with respect, with acknowledgement, right? And that did something really strange to me, in a sense that when I think you are given genuine respect, you feel that you're the most important human being in the world, right? You feel, oh my gosh, this is worth, working it through. This is worth, putting all the hours to do the stuff. This is worth just doing the stuff that we need to do, right? And I think respect at the end of the day, really make us realize that a person that is giving it to us, he or she doesn't have to give it to us. And like you said, Helen, it is a gift. It is a choice that people make to part that gift, to us. And that just makes people feel really, really amazing. And yeah, I thought I'd just share that thought of mine. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, Kim. And just to add to that, I think people often confuse respect with politeness in terms of where things are. And as the Soundwave model shows, there is a level beyond that. And I think we must always remember that it's not just about being polite, it's about really showing that respect and that understanding.
I just want to hop onto the question really quickly, because I think this is the second time I think Helen mentioned this, and may direct it to Sonja and Kevin, where she talks about the Soundwave model for respect. Would you guys care to elaborate that a little bit? Because I'm a little bit curious about that. Yeah.
I care. Let me pop up my screen again. So she's talking about the model between policy and conversation, and our hypothesis is that the journey to institutionalizing respect basically starts by evolving both in equal measures. So without having good conversation, your policy will remain in the drawer. It won't be alive, as Helen said. But without good policy, you might have all sorts of sort of peripheral issues. You might have a fantastic boss who really understands you, but you never get paid on time. So that also doesn't work. And the journey of the model is really coming from a deficit area where neither are in place over what we call the polite zone, where I think organizations often stop to the zone that we were talking about trying to achieve, institutionalizing respect in a way where you have a live policy that speaks to the people inside and outside of your organization, and a culture that is really person-centric, where great conversation happens at every level, and in structured and in unstructured conversation.
But there's a break in my building work, so I'm going to speak for a second and I'll stop halfway through if I'm overwhelmed. There's a really important dimension which would really expand this conversation further, but so many of these concepts are wrapped up with each other. Kim Pong and I have had some conversations recently about the concept of psychological safety. In my mind's eye, there's something about how vulnerable or invulnerable I'm feeling before I'm able to really give respect. And I think it's worth recognizing that people who are more junior in organizations will, and perhaps more vulnerable because of that, find it more difficult. They can get to politeness, they can say good morning and how are you, but they won't necessarily be equipped with that inner confidence to go beyond just the formalities of hi, how are you? Because I think it requires a lot more of ourselves. When we give respect, we're also offering a level of vulnerability. I can only offer vulnerability, paradoxically, is if I'm feeling reasonably non-vulnerable. And there are a lot of people in organizational life who feel vulnerable a lot of the time. So I think this whole area is just, magically fascinating. And I can hear the machine whirring, so I'm going to mute myself again.
Also mindful that we're 5 minutes over everybody's time, but before we close, Louise, you look like several times you wanted to say something and you got stopped, so please go.
So I think as I'm listening to this, I was thinking, and I hear what you're describing about the companies that get this wrong, people leave, the really talented don't join, their customers don't like them and leave. And I would love that to be true, but that's actually, like, not wishing to be kind of a bit gloomy, actually not my experience. Now, it might just be that I've worked in some fairly dark places, but I'm kind of sitting here thinking about a CEO that I worked for. I mean, I've got like hundreds of stories, but this guy is we're sitting in the departure lounge in Singapore, flying back to London. And he's telling me, like, this is hilariously funny, about how his employees had taken him to court for bullying. And then his really funny story is, here he comes into the court this morning, and the judge comes in, and then he sits down and he looks at him and he said, "You again." And he thought this was like uproariously funny, that he was not just a one-time. And I mean, I'm thinking, how much do you have to do to your employees where they're actually now taking you to court? Because I'm thinking, there's a whole pyramid of just upset where people just were upset and kept quiet, and also the fact that he thought this was hilariously amusing, and actually I think not to even be ashamed of, actually to be quite happy to tell that story. Like, wasn't he great? And I mean, he's still like successfully a very, very wealthy CEO. So, and I find this really hard when I'm going into factories and I'm talking to people on the shop floor and I'm teaching the Shingle model. I'm talking about respect and humility, and and I understand that the a lot of the thing that underpins the Shingle model is that thing about the long term, the sustainable. Like, so we're not talking about, I did a startup, erected a facade, sold it and ran away with the money. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about that enduring value, right, for all of the stakeholders. But even at that, I kind of feel like while I'm talking to people in factories, actually sitting there is, people like Ryanair and stuff who are abusive actually to their customers. That whole, well, what the hell do you expect for the money? They're rude to everybody, and you think, but hugely successful. And I kind of feel almost a wee bit like people are looking at me like I'm telling them something that we all want to be true, but kind of isn't.
I mean, I think I agree. You excuse my French, you will always get to a certain point by being an absolute dick in business, and as an organization probably also. I think the trick, like you mentioned, is about that sustainability. Ryanair only needs that one competitor who has great customer service and does things cheaply, and Ryanair will be out of the picture. That CEO only needs that one guy underneath him that actually inspires people and makes people want to deliver more, and he will be out of the picture. So it's, for me, it's in the longevity of a relationship. Yeah. Why this is important.
And I do know, just before I get, I do realize that also the other thing that's I think difficult about this is that actually the truth is I have the only persons in the world's behavior that I have the power to change is my own. So actually when we talk about this thing about respect, sometimes we feel like, what, you know, I'm trying to, you know, go in and role model the right thing, and it's a daily struggle, because I think that is our humanity, that we get up in the morning and we want to go out in the world and be our best self, and actually as soon as we've hit the motorway we're already thinking that person's an asshole. Like, so our good intentions probably lasted about 3 minutes. So, and I think that is our shared humanity. It's a daily struggle to try and be your best self. But I am just acutely aware that the thing that is hard in this is that quite often very senior leaders will have a narrative that says, I'm hugely successful and hugely wealthy, therefore everything I'm doing is right, so this does not apply to me. And I find that as a practitioner kind of a difficult, you know. Yeah, so that's my
the only thing I would say, Louise, is there's an exception to every rule. And you're absolutely right, you know, in terms of where things are. Does it mean it's right or the right thing to do is what I would question in terms of that piece. And you know from the retelling those stories that you don't believe it's the right thing to do either. So I think it's very true. I'm really sorry, guys. I'm going to have to drop off now, but thank you so much for everyone, and thank you for your really interesting questions. I really enjoyed the session, so thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen.
I think we're gonna probably pop out. We've gone as we do. So I was boasting that we haven't gone over time, and here we are going over time.
Because it's interesting.
But yeah, I'd like to thank everybody. I really enjoyed those last 3 webinars. Fantastic conversation, fantastic challenges, and I'm sure we're going to do another run of those at some point, aren't we, Kevin?
We are, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. They've been really brilliant. I've loved them. So thank you.